and Amy. So, updating the breaking news of this shooting in Alexandria, Capitol Hill Police and Alexandria Police just had a press conference, and here's what we know. House Majority Whip Scalise was shot. He is in stable condition, as are 2 Capitol Hill police officers and 1 aide.
1 congressional aide, correct.
And then there are dueling reports, conflicting reports about the status of Texas Congressman Roger Williams. Fox News had reported that he was also hit, and that's been also reported as that there were members of Congress that were on the baseball field, baseball practice, that dove into the dugout looking for cover. Mm-hmm. And maybe Williams was just injured. He was taken off on a stretcher, but he could have just been injured trying to avoid being shot. We don't know, but we'll continue to update the story as more info becomes available.
We do know that the gunman has been shot by Capitol Police, who were protecting the congressional members who were on the field. Mo Brooks said that the rifle came over the third base dugout, which was a cinder block dugout. Shots started fire, 50 rounds. Again, 5 people hit. And by the way, he apparently asked before he started shooting the gunman, middle-aged white man, if whether or not these were Democrats or Republicans on the field.
Right. He had asked 2 Republican members of Congress, Jeff Duncan and Congressman DeSantis. Also, Jeff Flake saying of those 50 shots, he says 50 shots is an understatement. Really? In terms of how many shots fired.
Yeah, they said everyone was trying to take cover wherever they could on the baseball field and, of course, into the dugout. But I keep thinking today is President Trump's birthday. Was this lunatic nut trying to send a message on this is the president's 71st birthday?
Well, I think the more relevant question was he targeting these members of Congress because they were Republicans.
Yeah, well, they're getting ready for a big game. I mean, tomorrow night they're supposed to play the Washington Nationals ballpark for their congressional charity baseball game. And obviously that game is not going to be played. I can't imagine that it would be. Don't know for sure, but that's why they were practicing early this morning. Senator Rand Paul was out there, too, and he said, if it weren't for the Capitol Police, there would have been a massacre because they took down the gunman.
Right. He was shot before being taken into custody. The gunman reportedly shot. And then another congressman, a Republican from Ohio, who's a surgeon by trade, Brad Wenstrup, apparently rendered aid to Scalise, as did Mo Brooks, who's a Republican congressman from Alabama, who I guess used his belt as a tourniquet because Scalise was shot in the hip.
U.S. Capitol Police and Alexandria Police Chief had a very brief news conference. They didn't take questions from the media, and they said 5 people were hit. He would not release the IDs, even though we know who was hit, and he wouldn't release what hospitals they were taking to because of a safety precaution.
But but right now there's 5. But we've got Scalise, we've got an aide, we've got 2 Capitol Hill officers, and then we maybe have Congressman Williams,
Or maybe it's
not.
the gunman that they're including.
Maybe they're including the gunman, right. So we'll be as responsible and specific as we can as information becomes available from credible news sources. But in the meantime, we turn to the issue of leadership and team building, particularly in the context of presidential administrations as well as military operations and the marriage of the two. And to help us discuss this issue, we're pleased to be joined by Chris Fussell, who is a U.S. Navy SEAL. He's also a partner at the McChrystal Group Leadership Institute and is the author of the book, One Mission, How Leaders Build Teams of Teams. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me on this morning. It's disheartening to hear the news going on there in Northern Virginia.
Yeah. So you were a Navy SEAL, are a Navy SEAL. And now you're still in the business of team building, but broader than in a military context. What recommendations would you have for the Trump administration, as frankly, they're still in the very early stages of building out their entire administration's teams?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult challenge, obviously, and I think, as outsiders coming in, obviously there's a lot of rules to the road to figure out, and there are deep networks inside of any organizations that has existed for a long time, as our government has. So bringing in more outside views, it takes a while to start to connect the dots across different boundaries. So one of our core theses inside of One Mission and the work we do with organizations is understanding and highlighting those networks and starting to build true trust-based cross-functional relationships. So I would start there, and I think this extends beyond the White House, but just to the Beltway in general, to try to overcome the gridlock. This is about individuals understanding and respecting one another's viewpoints. They might disagree with it, but understanding the perspective they have and trying to find some sort of common ground toward an overarching mission that makes sense for everyone. That's the idea of one mission. That's what worked for us inside the special operations community, where it's easy to think from the outside, well, the goal there is just to win because it's combat. Well, it's never that simple. Everyone has a different perspective on a complex fight. That's what we encountered with Al-Qaeda in multiple theaters around the world, and we had leadership that was willing to step in and say, look, this is a hard fight. It's very complex. We've got a skilled threat network here. Everyone has a different perspective on how to attack that problem. Everyone has very, very strong sort of tribal norms inside of their teams or their organizations. We as a collective have to figure out each other's perspectives. We have to respect one another's views on the fight and find an overarching mission that we can accomplish together. And so I think, all too often in the Beltway today, all of our senior-most leaders get pulled down into the tactical level, and that's a sign of dysfunction of the system. The world is just moving too quickly for that to happen. So I'd encourage all the leaders to get up to the strategic level and find that common narrative. That's what the American population wants and deserves, is what's the overall theme that we're trying to accomplish here. And then political parties and different individuals underneath that can figure out their role in accomplishing that singular mission.
But even if we're trying to be nice, I mean, look what happened a few days ago. 3 American soldiers were killed by Taliban insiders. What do they call it? Blue on green? I mean, people were trying to train, took their weapon and turned it on 3 of our own. And it's just a headline that no one's even discussing.
No, that's right. And I think, anytime you see things like that overseas, obviously, and given my background and time there, it's just exceptionally disheartening to see. It's the reality of a complex fight. It's the reality of an insurgent-based threat network. But to your point, the fact that we're too mired in just sort of day-to-day headline, almost tabloidy issues, it runs the risk of missing the big picture here. There is a world out there that is still moving very quickly. It's creating complex problems on a daily basis, and as long as our leaders, regardless of which side of the aisle, are being pulled into the headline chasing, they're missing the fact that the world is out there moving on without us in some cases, or presenting, to your point, very real and dire issues that our men and women in uniform are facing on a daily basis.
The McChrystal Group Leadership Institute, where you're a partner, that's General Stanley McChrystal, right?
That's correct, yeah. So I was in the SEAL teams for about 15 years, served several tiers underneath then General McChrystal, and spent 1 year on his immediate staff in 2008, 2009, when he was running this global counterterrorism task force, and we got to be close in service, and we've remained good friends since then, and we've been partners at the McChrystal Group for the last 5 years.
I got to ask you about this Netflix movie starring Brad Pitt called War Machine, where Brad Pitt plays, basically a caricature of McChrystal, from my take on it, and what you thought of that, and who portrayed you in the movie.
Well, I don't have time to watch movies these days, so I can't really comment directly on it. It's based on, if I understand correctly, sort of a history of events there that was debunked by Army investigations. So I would assume the accuracy is not quite there. But I'm quite confident that I'm not portrayed in the movie because I was not on McChrystal's staff at that point.
Well, now, one of the things, just in terms of McChrystal's tenure and how this feeds into the work that you do now, of course, the famous Rolling Stone interview that he gave, and that's portrayed in the movie, and where he was perceived to be critical of his commander-in-chief at the time, President Obama. And I wonder, because we have a similar dynamic now in the intelligence community with those that don't want to be openly critical of President Trump, so they leak information and so forth. When your executive, your commander-in-chief, whether it's literally in the military or whether it's an approximation in the private sector, is doing something you find untoward, unethical, perhaps even illegal, how do you rally the team around setting things right in an environment where there is a real disconnect in terms of behavior consistent with the stated ethos of the organization?
Yeah, I mean, the greatest example I saw of this in my own time in the service was from General McChrystal, who constantly reminded us. I mean, we lived in sort of the deeper, shadowy areas of the global conflict, but was a constant reminder that we are here at to serve the civilian leadership. We're here on behalf of the nation. We cannot take our mission as the first and foremost, most primary important thing out there. We are part of a bigger machine. So we always have to put that first and foremost in how we think about our role in the fight and communicate underneath that umbrella. I think the best leaders can avoid the temptation to get involved in the daily sort of headline churn and focus on the bigger picture and constantly communicate. Here's why we exist as an enterprise. Here's what we're going to accomplish based on the direction that our civilian leadership is suggesting and the way the nation wants to go. Anytime we see too senior folks getting pulled into the lower level issues, I think it's a bad indicator. Of course, that there's history of how games are played in Washington, and we can recognize that, but it doesn't make it right or justified. And I think if there's one entity out there that consistently tries to take that proper high road, it's been the U.S. military, and I've consistently been impressed by the willingness of senior leaders to put country and mission first and foremost in their thinking.
All right. Who would you like to play you in the movie about you when it's made?
I would have said Brad Pitt, but
maybe.
That was taken.
Yeah. Okay. He is Chris Fussell, former U.S. Navy SEAL, partner at the McChrystal Group Leadership Institute.
Christian Bale.
Author of Christian Bale.
Christian Bale.
You want Christian Bale to play you?
No, Chris.
Oh,
you
Christian
should play.
Bale.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about The Rock? I think maybe The Rock. He's also the author of the book One Mission: How Leaders Build Teams of Teams. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks to you both. Have a great day.
You too.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.